Please note that this video provides general legal education and not tailored legal advice. If you need tailored legal advice, please apply to Q Legal's free legal advice clinic.
Welcome to this Q Legal video on shareholders agreements. After watching this video, you will understand what shareholders agreements are, why they are important, what they typically include, and when a startup should consider creating one. So firstly, what are shareholders agreements? Shareholders agreements are a legal document that set out the key elements of the governance of a company, including the rights, obligations, and responsibilities that the shareholders of a company owe to both each other and to the company itself. A shareholders agreement is a private document entered into by the shareholders. However, it is also important that the agreement remains consistent with the company's articles of association. Please see our video on this for more information. So, when should a shareholders agreement be considered, and what do they typically include? Startups should consider the need for a shareholders agreement early on, usually when the startups start to attract external investment, especially when there are multiple shareholders. The specific contents of the agreement is subject to negotiation and will depend on the needs and circumstances of the parties involved. However, the agreement will typically include provisions which address share ownership, dividends policy, the rights and obligations of the shareholders, decision-making processes, information rights, the transfer of shares, and the governance of the company. The agreement can address issues that may arise later, such as exit mechanisms. Furthermore, shareholders may want to include provisions for when a deadlock occurs. So this is when shareholders are unable to reach a decision, which can be particularly problematic when a company is owned by two shareholders, each with 50% ownership, as both will have an equal share in decision-making. So, why are shareholders agreements so important? Whilst not mandatory for a company to draft a shareholders agreement, it is highly advisable. Startups may think of it like a prenuptial agreement between shareholders, providing protection in case something goes wrong. Without a shareholders agreement, startups could face issues that arise later, which could lead to costly legal disputes over matters such as ownership or profit sharing. However, whilst helpful from a legal perspective, drafting a formal shareholders agreement with the help of a lawyer can be very expensive. Startups can keep the upfront cost of a shareholders agreement down through keeping the agreement short and concise in early stages, dealing with key issues only. Given the expense associated with preparing a shareholders agreement, startups could seek clarity on the expectations and relative contributions of their shareholders before drafting an agreement to avoid disputes later on. Let us take our fictional business Coffee Close as an example. Coffee Close is a sustainable startup based in Mile End, London, and has two founders, Jane and Bob, who each own 50% of the company. They attract their first outside investor, a family friend who will acquire 10% of the business, and then it may be the right time for draft a shareholders agreement. At this stage, Jane, Bob, and the family friend may need to negotiate the terms of the agreement, possibly incorporating some provisions originally mentioned in their founders' agreement. However, as shareholders agreements are private contracts between existing shareholders, they will not automatically extend to new shareholders, unless specific mechanisms are put in place. Typically, new shareholders will need to sign a deed of adherence which will bind them to the existing shareholders agreement. Thank you very much for watching this Q Legal video. Now you have watched this video, you should understand what shareholders agreements are, why they are important, what they typically include, and when a startup should consider drafting one.
For free legal advice tailored to your business, please go to the Q Legal website and apply to the Q Legal Legal Advice Clinic. For additional videos and other helpful resources, please go to the Q Legal Resource Hub.